So hey everyone, happy Friday. We're gonna have a great show today. We got a few more people to trickle in, and then I'll officially roll the intro and we'll get going. But yeah, we're just talking with Ryan about you know Wi-Fi and stuff, and that's one thing that I noticed is the biggest divide between the developed and developing worlds. With all the different guests I've had on, is always like the connection quality. Like everything else, they seem like they stay in great places, have access to great stuff, but just that like fast like internet is one thing that's always a little hard to get.
Yeah, the digital infrastructure. Definitely. I'm on Wi-Fi too, so it makes it much more difficult to be able to have expectations of plugging in Ethernet to a router, which would be nice, but
Yeah,
not always,
that would be
always an
fun.
option.
Yeah. So probably before you actually start the show, I should mention um, a lot of people in the Dash community, which is my first kind of audience. There's a former figure in the Dash community who had your exact name,
Yeah, I
and
realize this.
and for some people that was like a negative connotation because he ended up sort of getting fired. In fact, he was on my podcast, and based on his appearance on the podcast, he got fired like right after
Oh
that.
shit.
He was kind of the figurehead of the project too, and so he
Uh-huh.
just and so now people are like, "What? He's on your show again?"
Good.
It's a
Let me
hilarious
kick up some dirt, even though
coincidence.
it's not me.
Yeah, now they're gonna be tagging him on Twitter and just being like, "You scammer" or whatever. And it's like, what are you talking about? I wasn't even on the show.
Yeah. I remember when Ryan Taylor actually became a bit more popular and prominent in the cryptocurrency scene. For a while, you could type Ryan Taylor Bitcoin into your search engine, and it would just come back
Mm-hmm.
with my Bitcoin magazine stuff. But then Dash entered the scene. That Ryan Taylor is much more. He has much more of an online presence than I do. Um, with my
Interesting.
live streaming and everything, I always kept a low profile behind the camera type of thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, I've been asked if I'm him before, and no, I'm definitely not. Actually, GPT thinks that we're the same person. It created some amalgamy of the
Interesting.
two of us who worked for Bitcoin Magazine and was the CEO or whatever of Dash.
Yeah. It is just kind of funny how like the names thing, like the same name, and it's like you're the number one, and then another name pops in, and then there's this precipitous fall from grace, and now you could probably have the title back. It's like, look
Mm.
at me, I am the real Ryan Taylor now.
I lasted the storm.
Yeah, slow and steady wins the race. Oh,
Hmm.
all right. So it's probably a good time to roll the intro and get this thing going. Let me go hit this button real quick, and we'll go. So, hey everyone, officially happy Friday now. Welcome to the Digital Cash Rundown. I'm joined by, I usually say the one and only. In this case, not the one and only Ryan Taylor, but the one and only Ryan Taylor who's still around and willing to come on my show because I don't think the other one's coming back on ever again. So, how's it going, Ryan?
Joel, it's great. Thanks for having me. This is a blast, and it's good to be the surviving Ryan Taylor, I suppose.
Yes, the one who survived, the one who made it. Um, yeah, so do you mind just explaining to people real quick your crypto background, just so people kind of get up to speed on that? It seems
Yeah,
like
no
you've been
problem.
around for a while.
I have. First Bitcoin I received is usually a good place to start. That would have been Halloween 2011, and
Hmm.
shortly thereafter, I got an email from Mihaly and Vitalik to work on Bitcoin Magazine. I'm doing some writing for them. This was early 2012. I became the webmaster for Bitcoin Magazine, and then the early webmaster for Ethereum.org. And then that went for a while. I was live streaming, traveling around, doing some open source and decentralized project live streaming for events that couldn't really afford it, not the big events, the underground stuff. And then I went on to work for Electric Coin Company, the Zcash company, was their webmaster for a few years, and now
Hmm.
I am the organizer of the Zcash Foundation Audiovisual Club. For those, we announced that 3 months ago.
Yeah, yeah, and I've been on the AV Club live meetup thingy a couple times now. It's a good time. It's definitely talked about my ghetto open source setup thingy for for the show there, and now you get to experience it firsthand.
That was great though, and I'll be releasing that podcast this weekend or next week. We did multilingual, so I'm having fun doing the subtitles and making sure all the translations are proper on that before releasing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy what like AI and stuff can do with that. I have I kind of grew. I mean, I've kind of consolidated, unfortunately, into more of a monolingual life. But I used to be fully trilingual and with some basic other stuff, and then kind of like, too long of living in New Hampshire where everyone speaks one thing, kind of got me on that. But I still did understand all the Spanish that they were talking about.
Oh, excellent. That's really good. Yeah, if you don't use languages, you lose them. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's hit on this first subject. We got a bunch of fun stuff going on, and as usual, this is the show you go to for people with a service level knowledge of the news, but maybe a little bit deeper understanding of the concept. So anyway, this first one: U.S. regional bank shares sink despite Fed calling bank system sound. So there's been a lot of bank failures recently. And I have not been entirely up to date on every single last one of them. They kind of like, at first it was like the Silicon Valley, Silvergate, kind of like the tech sector stuff. And a lot of that impacted the crypto world. And then I, of course, asked around like, hey, who got impacted by this? And thankfully, none of the things that I really relied on did. But then there's more and more. And then, a lot of bank shares are going down. There's a lot of ideas that banks are not doing very well right now. It's kind of, the FUD hit the system, as it were, right? So what's your take on this?
It seems to be real. I mean, people have been saying it for a while. I don't live in the U.S. anymore. I'm from there. I moved out 8 years ago. I moved out to Europe. And so I'm seeing a lot of this. I do depend on a bank account in the U.S., to move my fiat through, or to move my crypto through the fiat system, rather. So it does concern me. It's weird that we might be experiencing the second global banking crisis in our lifetimes, within 15 years of each other.
Yeah, in our very short
this
lifetimes.
Seriousness. Yeah, exactly. So in that way, it's like it's really shocking and concerning, but like you said, the FUD word. So part of me thinks this is just regulators being regulators, politicians being politicians, bankers being bankers, the state doing the state's thing. And I don't want to worry too much about it. On the other hand, like I don't really make fiat. I don't earn fiat. I earn crypto, and I've been like you. I've gone through phases where I live off of it entirely. I found that as a nomad, it was kind of easy until the Bitcoin wallets and local Bitcoins stopped working so much. So I couldn't find traders locally, and now I do have to depend on banks, which concerns me when stuff like this happens. It does. I think it's interesting that the crypto world cares so much about this, and it does seem a little bit like they're sort of hoping for the apocalypse, hoping for Armageddon, because what else is crypto's interest in the U.S. or the fiat banking system?
Yeah, I guess it's like that popular meme of like Elmo going like this with the flames in the background. It's just kind of like waiting for it all to come down. It is kind of funny about like the people. There's the meme going around about the second once in a lifetime crisis in my lifetime kind of thing. But I mean, hopefully this will kind of wake some people up. I think that like Gen Z is kind of more crypto native, like they kind of grew up knowing what NFTs are and things like that. But beyond that, like millennials, like speaking for myself, like one of my first jobs, like first careers, like part of my career out of college, was in politics and stuff. I interned for the Bush White House and then got some like political job in DC, and then the 2008 crisis hit, and then that kind of like knocked me off. Like I lost that job, and I kind of struggled to resume that career. And eventually, I just like said no to that career entirely and moved just straight into crypto over the years. And just that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 8 or so years. But like, it's funny because that happened, and at like the beginning of my attempted career, and then I'm not that old today, and it happened again. And so for someone like me, I'm detached from it. But from for a lot of people, it's not just like, well, the one thing happened and then we got over it. It's just like the one thing happened and then it happened again and you're not even an old man yet. So I wonder if this is going to start to wake the, not the people who were born into the crypto native generation, but the other people. I wonder if it's going to wake some of the more like millennial people up and start kind of getting them to figure this stuff out, or even, Gen X and stuff. What do you think?
I mean, I agree with you definitely that the Generation Z is on a path to really understand this stuff as their native language. And it's the cryptocurrencies, the NFTs, the smart contracts, all of that is going to be like email is for us, I think, to them.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as like waking everyone else up, it probably depends where you go, because they definitely still remember 2008 if you go to Greece or if you go to Spain. They still feel the effects of that. And so if this thing in the US, this crisis is as big as people are saying, then that's terrifying to places that are still affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you that there's huge swaths of the older population in the US, in Germany, where I am, in the more comfortable countries. There's huge swaths of the population that they're just like kind of jaded to it, callous to it. I think the younger generation might get to that point as well, where they're like jaded and just callous to fiat in general, which would be kind of interesting. They're like, yeah, it crashes all the time. Why would we mess with that stuff?
Yeah.
It's possible too.
Yeah, and it would be very interesting to see demographics and sentiments and stuff. I think a lot of people, the thing with the banking crashes so far is this isn't quite like a Great Depression type run, where you can't get your money out of the bank, really. I mean, it's more of a lot of people lose money in investments, and that has ripple effects throughout the economy and industries, in which case, but that's kind of the similarity between, so far, between, who knows, we could all be like with a knife between our teeth in the streets and like by next week, but like it seems like the similarity between these two kind of crises is it's more like when the crypto hits a bear market. And it's just like, oh, people lose money and then people get laid off too. And so maybe this does not endear people to crypto, because it's just another, well, crypto dumps too, kind of thing. But if we start seeing like people not be able to get their money out of a bank, that's when I think it's going to start endearing people to crypto.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll see if that happens, if it becomes that level of crisis, where people aren't able to get the money out of the bank, where they can't withdraw their fiat, then that could go into fiat. The other thing that we're not seeing in this so far in the last few months is the Bitcoin price fluctuation. It's kind of staying steady there in the 28 to 32,000 range. I guess there has been an alt season that I see on Twitter. I see people talk about this, but we don't see that in Zcash. So I'm not really sure what's being pumped right now. Or if it's just people kind of like, tightening their wallets and buckling down or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's also, I guess, a separate discussion, is like the unintentional stable coins in the crypto market that just are kind of at their utility level rather than their speculative level, because they don't have a lot of speculative level, and that kind of happens. But yeah, I mean, the whole like Pepe coin stuff, I ain't like, okay, well, might as well just hit on that one. Before that, there's a funny tweet here that said, Fed Chair Jerome Powell says banking system is sound, resilient. 2 hours later, PacWest, Western Alliance, and Metropolitan Bank down a combined 100%. So
this reminds me of something from the early Bitcoin days, that I think I'm jaded to all of this fluctuation and like alarms going off with the fiat system, because of the something I noticed in the early days of Bitcoin was, when you know something about a certain topic and they talk about it in the news, it's all garbage. Like, that what they're talking about, they have no idea what they're talking about. And with Bitcoin, this has been obvious for years. But a lot of things that you don't know about, you kind of give the benefit of the doubt to the journalist, to the speaker, the researcher, whoever's presenting. It's an interesting sort of mental trick that happens there, I think. And this again is a good example of that, of some politicians saying like, yeah, it's all safe, it's fine, and then it crashes a week later. It's like no one really has a freaking clue what they're talking about. They're just trying to sell you some donuts.
Yeah, the Jim Cramers of the world, right?
Hmm.
I should mention that in the super chat, Hilawe did say, well, "Will the real Ron Taylor please stand up? Welcome."
I can't stand right now. I've got nowhere, no place.
Yeah,
But
it's all right. You don't need to stand up.
I can
So
raise the rate for some Slim Shady though.
yeah. So this next one, Memecoin hype drives Bitcoin transaction fee to multi-year highs. Despite the latest spike in Bitcoin transaction fees, the current BTC transaction cost is still far from all-time high. All right, so we've seen this kind of thing happen before, right? With the Bitcoin transaction fees are not really, they're kind of susceptible to spikes. And yeah, so with trading frenzy of stuff like Pepecoin, ended up cascading into Bitcoin, and then there you go. Now we have over $10 transaction fees again, which is not near like the $60 to $80 highs, but now it's not like you can just pay the fee stuff. It's kind of
Yeah.
cascaded into that stuff. Yeah. So, what's your take on the all too predictable by now fee spike kind of situation?
When was the last time we had like the super all-time highs? When was that? Because I'm
That
thinking
was
like SegWit battles,
2017.
but that was okay. So it was the SegWit battles. It was that whole war that went down where I had transactions I found in mobile wallets that hadn't gone through for months, and I had to end up like double spend canceling them. And it was because I had no idea that at that point the transaction fees were so high it was just ridiculous. So I see this happening again, and I'm reminded of that, which makes any kind of adoption impossible. Like
Yeah.
this sort of thing, I'm not a fan of the idea of chasing mass adoption. I think it's a Moby Dick of the industry. It's not something. It's a monster that we might not want to catch, and and this is proof to me that like Bitcoin's definitely not ready for any kind of mass use. If the transaction time is important, if people are doing trades on exchanges, then none of this matters anyway, because it's all off chain, typically off chain. But Lightning must be loving this, right? Like, isn't there kind of a solution to that? You pay attention. What's going on there?
Yeah, about that. So, Lightning, unfortunately, is because of the structure of it, right? There's actually very few people using Lightning, and the people that are using Lightning, most of them are using it through custodial services. So a lot of the transactions are not even Lightning, and it's just like a couple of large like hubs directing it. But that should be kind of the case. I have noticed in the transaction fee spikes of these markets, it has kind of settled down a little bit. Like people have gotten better at it. But one thing's for sure. So this is something I want to tell you. I was torturing the maximalist about, and so I made this meme. You're gonna put that up on the screen, where I made the Captain Phillips or whatever meme. I said with the Litecoin saying, "Look at me, I'm the real Lightning Network now," because Litecoin on-chain transactions are I think around 350,000 right now. They're about to pass Bitcoins. So over the years, Litecoin is like steadily started to bump up. But one thing I've noticed is when there's these crunches, right? So Litecoin hit like 100 and some thousand transactions, I believe, in 2017 with the first giant fee run up. And I remember Litecoin fees were an average of like $2 per transaction back then because there was this sudden crunch of people trying to get their money mostly off of Coinbase. And then they can't get it with Bitcoin, so they have to swap it for Litecoin, and then there you go. So we're seeing this kind of thing as well, where like ordinals and things like that are starting to move over to Litecoin, and Litecoin's transaction fees or transaction volumes have gone significantly up. The fees are still on average below 1 cent, though, I think. So this time they kind of figured that out, and it's kind of funny how like Litecoin is the real. It is. I mean, I say it's like the real Lightning Hour. It is kind of true because it is what people who use Bitcoin seem to be using when they can't use Bitcoin, rather than taking it to L2s like Lightning. It's just kind of I've enjoyed torturing some people about that one.
And I think it's a valid torture tool. Well, I don't know. I never thought those are words I'd put together, but I think it's a valid argument because I think Lightning Network's cool. I think the developments that the engineers that are working on it, they're working on a cool project. I
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily see the practicality of it yet because it's so easy to switch chains. If as long as like if you're doing a small amount on an exchange, then the exchange fee isn't too much, depending on, or if you're using any of the like the ERC20 swap services, then like that doesn't it doesn't. I don't think that it makes sense to have layer 2 when you can just switch to a different layer 1, and
Yeah.
there's validity to that. And if like even moving between exchanges or pulling your money off an exchange is different if you're going to a wallet, but maybe moving between exchanges, say you want to move some Bitcoin from one exchange to another, you can exchange it for Litecoin, move the Litecoin to the other exchange, and then switch it back to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And the market volatility you might lose a buck or two. You wait, if you have patience, you get rewarded for your patience. So all of this comes into mind more from a user experience than a user experience angle than a layer 2 thing that is difficult to use, difficult to learn, and maybe less secure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Because Litecoin is essentially a copy of Bitcoin in a lot of ways, and obviously some tweaked parameters and stuff. But it works. The same basic functionality works, except because of the faster block time, it essentially has like 4 times the block size, the effective block size, the capacity, and so it can scale better in that way. And it's just like the cheap thing that people can use, and especially when you have cross-chain dexes like Thorchain that make it easy to just do like a one-click swap across. Of course, there are some like fees associated, but one of my developer heroes, Chad Bareford of Thorchain, he's already like coded up a thing that he calls I forget what it's called, but it's like a streaming swap, where if I want to swap like 1 Bitcoin for Litecoin, I don't want to have all these slippage fees. I'll instead of like 1 Bitcoin goes in the pool and and the equivalent in Litecoin comes out, it'll go in the pool and then make the swap in over like 10 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour of small individual swaps, and then kick out the Litecoin back. So it takes longer, but then you just don't get slippage fees and it's cheap. So like all this stuff that's happening to like the DEX world, at some point it's just going to become a lot easier to do. And also since Litecoin has Mimblewimble, or the Mimblewimble extension block, which works. I mean, again, I'm glossing over for all like the privacy nerds out there. They're going to be losing their shit at the thing, but it has a similar effect to CoinJoin, even though it's got a lot of different parameters and stuff. And so instead of having to like send to the Whirlpool in your Samurai wallet to get privacy, it's just like, okay, we'll use your Litecoin for fast stuff, and you use it through Mimblewimble, and it just and also my understanding is the more it can kind of act as a scaling solution as well. And so obviously I'm not a Litecoin maxi. There's a lot of projects I like a lot better and use a lot better and innovate a lot more. It's just that in terms of that relationship to Bitcoin, it seems to be the one that's won out. That's like people don't want to use largely a radically different structure for their cheap payments, where you have to make sure there's liquidity figured out along your entire path, rebalance stuff, do a whole bunch of stuff, be online all the time, like all these parameters people just don't want to do. They've defaulted to centralized payment processors instead, or Litecoin, and that annoys a lot of maxis, but it seems to be the reality right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, I really like what you said about the different options that people have. The fact that we have these different options between different coins that are innovating at different rates, that have different features in the protocol that enable people to do what they want in an easy way. It's this balance of security and convenience with this added extra vulnerability thing having to do with your own personal identity. You have all of these different features that you can scale to fit your own needs, and we have different coins for all of that. We have different exchanges for all of that. We have dexes for all of that. So I think that's the most important thing to me. That's what decentralization was at the beginning when I first heard about Bitcoin, and then I heard about Litecoin. It's like, oh, we could have multiple of these. We can have millions of these. Great, that's super cool. That's exciting. And then people are like, no, Bitcoin's the real thing. I'm going. It's just because you bought Bitcoin back then and you want it to be worth the most. I'm pretty sure that's it. That's the only reason I think maxis are maxis. If we would have paid them more at the beginning, then they might be more willing to change their stride.
Funny enough, I have seen maxis at every step of the way, like every step of the journey. There's 2017 maxis, there's 2019, the 2021 maxis, like who bought a 69,000. There's like Sailor / Bukele era maxis and stuff, and like I think people, they like the show of strength, the kind of like number one, we're coming for the banking system, like all that kind of like hyperbole and the laser eyes and just buy more, it's going to the moon, and like they like all that stuff, and so it appeals to a certain kind of personality, I guess, that's looking for something to attach themselves to. But I mean, at some point, like no one would be. It's one thing I've noticed because I've known other Bitcoin maxis, meaning Bitcoin Cash and BSV maxis, and I even know some eCash maxis, which is kind of weird, but they get worn out by sinking market cap rankings. And so, like, Bitcoin being number one, they have a lot of staying power. Bitcoin having a shrinking percentage of the entire space, it still doesn't matter because so many people, it's still so much. But as soon as something flippins Bitcoin, or maybe even 2 or 3 things do, which I think is probably an eventuality, maybe not a short-term one. I think, maybe it'll take 5 years to get Ethereum to flip, maybe 10 years for something else. We'll see. But then it'll be really hard to be a maxi, when you're not. It's like it's predicated on being like number one. It's just like your entire brand is being a winner. And if you don't win, all of a sudden you have no brand left.
It's funny. Earlier, I was thinking about a lot of the anarchists that I've known over the years who have switched from anarchy to statism because they have a politician that they like all of a sudden.
Is this a reference to a certain person in a certain South American country, or is it?
No, not at all. I'm talking broadly. Over the years, as I consider myself an anarchist, and it's actually happened to me to some degree because like I was much more of an anarchist when I was living in the U.S. where I'm from. Now I moved to Germany, and I have to apply for the visa. I have to obey these rules in order to ask for permission to stay in the country. There's a whole bunch of anti-anarchy stuff I just said, and I admit that, and I'm okay with that because this is what I want. So I kind of understand, but I have seen people switch sides because they all of a sudden they find some politician, whether it's a state politician or a federal politician that they like, and now they're flat out statists. It's like, okay, it's good weather anarchists. I guess it's all right for the time being, for the fight.
Yeah, and that's something that I've kind of I would say exploited, but with the Bitcoin maxi crowd is at its core in the beginning, the whole Bitcoin ethos was like cypherpunk. It was, kind of crypto anarchist, right? It's pretty strongly, I think. I mean, from what I remember back in the day, man, I'm only around since 2013, so not that long, but I do remember that very strongly. And then even with the block size wars, at that point, to a certain extent, the maximalists did the small blockers, I should say, who are now the maxis, did kind of take the high road as far as like the more dogmatic road on that whole cypherpunk thing, where they're like, we need to keep it pure so that everyone can run a node because that's more cypherpunk kind of thing. And so they still have a lot of the same attitude, even if the ideas have morphed over time, where now it's just like number go up, you don't need to spend it, whatever. And today, the amount of people who are like, first of all, they simp for centralized solutions, like, centralized like Lightning providers and stuff, and custodial ones, which is even worse. But also, a lot of them say, I have as much Bitcoin as I can, but I earn fiat and I have fiat in the bank to pay bills. But then they call something like Litecoin a shitcoin. And as I mentioned before, I'm definitely I'm a occasional Litecoin user, and I'm like kind of lukewarm on the whole thing as a whole. But I'm like 100% into using Litecoin if the alternative is fiat, right? Thankfully for me, I have other options that aren't just Litecoin, right? But it's kind of funny to hit on people saying like, "Oh, you still have fiat and you're still using your bank, but you could be spending Litecoin," and they're like, no place takes it," and I'm just like, actually, and then I give them like a big list of things, and then they get annoyed, but whatever. That's what I do as I annoy these people.
Well, and at the very least, I mean, the idea of someone holding fiat and buying crypto, that's like the speculator way of looking at cryptocurrencies. I don't think I've ever actually bought cryptocurrency. I've always earned it, and at times
sounds like something that I've said. I'd never bought it either. Just earned it.
So I know how to like move it to fiat when I need fiat to pay for things. That's not it's not a problem. We solved that problem first. Mt. Gox, that was a disaster, but we solved that problem really early on. And so moving between cryptocurrencies, if a place you doesn't like, if a place you like doesn't accept Litecoin, then you can easily switch to Bitcoin and pay in Bitcoin. If they don't accept crypto, then pay with fiat. If you have fiat in your bank account, it's it depends on the individual, but it does seem like there's a big push for years now. I think since 2014, 2015 was when I started hearing this kickback against the crypto anarchists. And I remember live streaming events, and people on stage on panels would say like that we need to take this messaging back from the crypto anarchists. We need to take Bitcoin, this technology, back from the crypto anarchists. And I'm like, kind of wanting to turn my live stream off, turn my camera off, thinking like, we're the ones who really spread this. Like, we were the evangelists of this technology, and we were spending it when we needed to spend it in order to tell people about it. We were giving it to people in order to get them excited about it and see it work. And yeah, it hurts a little bit, to have people up on stage to saying that they feel like they need to take some of this, the ethos back or something, take some of this chaos under control. And it's for their own comfort level. I sort of get it. They're scared. But when you've been in crypto long enough, I once had someone ask me what it takes to be a crypto head. And my only answer was a lot of regret. Because you've been around long enough. You've seen it go up and down. You haven't sold when you could have made a bunch of money. And you've sold when it's like when you've lost a bunch of money. I have anyway. I've sold when I've lost a bunch of money. And then you watch how much money you really lost when you go to new all-time highs. And, we learn to live with that because we have to keep living. And then we end up with sort of guts of steel in these price talks and market charts and all that crap.
Yeah, I think that because just personally thinking about through the years, my decisions, and like financial gain is never one of them really. So I don't really, it's like I don't really keep that as a metric. But as far as like, oh, I tried so hard to do this stuff and I tried so hard to do that stuff, and then the perspective, I think that there's a lot of old timer perspective that's very valuable today, because every project seems to have to learn lessons like from the beginning. And it just like, for example, with like the Lightning thing, if you start seeing a lot of like hub and spoke model kind of things cropping up in the Lightning world, that's when it's time to like recall the block size wars discussions of like when they say, oh, we can do this thing, and then, oh, there's going to be Lightning sued 18 months, that whole meme, which it turned out eventually Lightning happened. But now it's just like, well, it's all custodial for the most part. And then, oh, there'll be some other improvements. It's interesting to keep those perspectives. As far as like the cypherpunk thing, that's also, I feel like that's also like a fun, like fundamentals power everything, right? And I feel like that's a fundamental where it's applicable even in a world where people aren't cypherpunk anymore, right? So when they try to take it back from the cypherpunks or whatever, at some point they start to say like, well, what good is this if I can just do that? If I can just do a custodial thing? Or like, why do we need to spend it? I have it in my bank. And then, but reality hits at some point and you get your transactions censored. You lose access to your bank account. You can't withdraw a certain amount. And then you start freaking out and you're like, well, what do I do with your big stack of Bitcoin there? It's just like, well, that's when you come to people like us who say like, look, listen, You connect your ledger to Thorchain. You go hit the swap button here. Here's a list of services that will accept everything directly. You do this, that, and then you're good. And then all of a sudden they're a believer. But they don't have to be a believer, because people like us are more like investor types, in terms of we invest in the future where this is needed by learning how to use the stuff today, whereas other people are a little bit more here and now.
Yeah, totally. It's good that we're laying the infrastructure work, and if the naysayers, a lot of them, I think you're right. They're just doing what they know, and until something bad happens, because and hopefully a lot of them have people like us around who they've been ignoring for years because we wouldn't shut up about it for years. And I've had that happen a lot. I've had a lot of people who I try to explain cryptocurrencies to, and now even worse, like they're just shut off to the ideas. And there's so much external fears, I guess, FUD in general, that keeps people turned off to the word cryptocurrency or Bitcoin. But that doesn't mean that we're not reaching some people, and that doesn't mean that we're not reaching people who, when they're in a moment of disaster, I think they'll know where to turn. And in 2008, this wasn't an option. So going back to our original talk about the banking crisis and stuff, like now there's an alternative. Back then there wasn't, or there was a new one, I suppose. A note to the chancellor.
Yeah, the whole break a second bailout type thing. Yeah, well, the groundwork kind of stuff kind of does take us to this next thing here about Montana governor signs pro-cryptocurrency mining bill into law. Legislation includes revisions to laws aimed at prohibiting discriminatory electoral rates for mining firms and not allowing taxation for crypto used as a method of payment. So there's been some rumblings of like anti-mining measures, like mining tax and stuff like that in the U.S. And just in this current climate of, especially the SEC going after everyone in the U.S., but other regulators kind of making it tough in there. We have seen some states kind of push back. How much attention have you paid to the like rumblings of different states trying to adopt different pro or anti-crypto measures?
Not too much. I do see it come over, the headlines come through over the years. I remember that, like, I know Wisconsin's been doing a lot. I've been hearing that Colorado has been doing a lot more in terms of adopting blockchain technology in their systems for things like land registration and supporting startups and payment processors and things like that. But when it comes to mining, I've seen headlines more about the countries trying to do things to control that, whether they're taxing it, outlawing it, totally domineering it. And in the U.S., I think it's interesting though, because this definitely seems like a move to get the businesses, to get the big mining farms, to get the big mining operations to move to places like Montana, where they probably have some regions that are cold for most of the year, and they can get some decent cooling and power prices there. So if you could add cheap land to it, then you're looking pretty golden for big mining companies and the big farms. And I know there is this big fear. There has been a fear of China taking over the mining operations and them totally having control of it for the last however long. So I'm not surprised that some states in the U.S. are stepping up and offering some alternative to that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because China banned the mining back then, and I remember it was significant enough to where the Bitcoin hash rate went off a cliff, and you couldn't get blocks through for like days at a time sometimes, while the difficulty had to readjust. And then a lot of these operations popped back up in other, I guess, neighboring countries, probably the same owners, and then a lot of it moved to the U.S. and stuff. And so, but it's kind of interesting how, in my cursory glancing of headlines and Twitter and stuff like that, I'm not really seeing a lot of individual states outside of like one or two maybe doing anything anti-crypto explicitly. I mean, there's already like basically New York with like the bit license and stuff from the old days, and then California exploring its own like bit license and other stuff like that. But outside of that, no one seems to have done anything of the sort. It's all the opposite direction. All the states seem to be moving in pro crypto directions. And I mean, I remember when he first got elected, Governor Sununu of New Hampshire signed into law some pro crypto bill, I believe, exempting crypto businesses from money service businesses business requirements. And there's a picture, I still have to go find it somewhere, but there's a picture of him holding up a big banner with like the Dash and Zcash logo and stuff and all that stuff on there. And so that was like from many years ago, in fact, like 2016, something like that, 2017, 18, somewhere around there. And then, of course, you have Wyoming kind of took the bigger spotlight recently, and you got stuff in Montana, Texas, and Florida. They're all doing this stuff. But then you have the SEC and Gary Gensler going one way, and then all like the administration, the federal administration, going that same way. And I would say the Biden administration, but Trump did famously tweet out that he hates crypto and it's a scam and stuff, like while he was president. So like there's this like different directions in the US where a lot of the US seems to be very pro crypto, but then a lot of like the government in other ways seems to be going the opposite direction. What I wonder is, when is this going to come to a head? Is there going to be some kind of good old fashioned marijuana style like state nullification that just takes root, and then the feds just back off of crypto because they can't do anything? Is there going to be like an actual like split between the states and the federal government? Is there going to be just a crackdown on the states where the feds just kind of like say we're going to do what we want and who cares what you pass, and then crypto kind of the industry kind of slinks off to other countries instead? Like, I don't know, it could be any of those.
I think it'll be probably some measure of all of those. Like with you brought up marijuana, and I remember in California that they used to have like sweep days through Southern California, LA County. They would go in and smash and destroy and grab all of the weed stores, even though the state of California had medical marijuana, and these were medical stores. So the feds didn't care, because at that time the feds were saying federal law says it's illegal, you can't do this. And then Colorado and Washington passed legal laws and recreational laws, and the smash and grab stopped. So I think you could see some measure of that. But on the other hand, like, states answer to their constituents, they answer to the people, and I think in the end, the states will end up overwhelming this federal attempt to outlaw them, to ban them, to strike them down, because the people are being represented by the states and not so much by the federal government.
Yeah, I mean, one can hope.
One can hope. I'm trying to be optimistic here, Joel. Help me out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of obviously a government minimalist, and down to zero if we can, right? But part of that involves a lot of like decentralization of the power that's currently there. And so I do believe a lot more in states' rights than federal rights, and a lot more in nullification and possibly secession. If it leads to that, that would be great. Obviously, all other things being equal, that would be great. Who knows if, let's just say, like, if California secedes and then becomes like a communist dictatorship, that might not be as good for the people of California, but for the rest of the world, maybe. But yeah, it's pretty crazy to see this sort of a split happening where, and I personally think that there's going to be a pushback, kind of like you see. I'm sure I don't keep very much up on European politics, but it does seem like, for example, in Europe, there's a lot of like backlash to the old like center left liberal democracy kind of, the way things have been going through, pro climate stuff, pro some immigration type stuff, pro tax and spend, like a lot of that kind of stuff seems to be a pushback. And I think in the US it's probably going to be due for a reckoning at some point soon, where obviously there's always been like a left versus right type deal and a lot of people in between, but probably I think that the boiling over of stuff like Coinbase suing the SEC or threatening to sue the SEC, and then other companies like moving offshore and all that stuff, I think that at some point you're going to have like a a pushback where national level politicians will not want to run, will want to run on a pro crypto thing, not necessarily explicitly crypto, but like a pro business and innovation thing to try to like bring that kind of stuff back.
Yeah, I think it would make sense. I mean, I don't think that would be a stupid move at all. Like, crypto is going to be, it's going to be here. It's like the web, and we've seen them try to control that. We've seen them try to manage that, and you need the experts to do this sort of stuff, to really explain this sort of stuff and to understand it. And you need the experts to be the ones, if you're going to make laws about it, then the experts need to be the ones making the laws. I'm also in the same boat as you with the minimalist on the government side, and I think that I don't think there should be laws to this, and I think that all the laws we've seen, this mining, this reassurance of mining, no mining laws or whatever it is in Montana is interesting, because I'm not used to seeing laws that say we're not going to make laws about this. That's kind of unique.
Yeah.
But so typically it's just more laws, more restrictions. The US would be making a huge mistake when it comes to business, when it comes to innovation, when it comes to technology. And they'd be making bad laws because they have no understanding of it. The governments just don't have understanding of it now. The state governments are speaking to the people. There's a lot of people who work in crypto who are doing great work, sort of lobbying, I guess you could call it, that going and educating regulators and educating state employees, state governments. They have a lot more access to the state compared to the federal government. So I have a feeling that's what we're seeing. And then also, like, the federal government has these these puppet masters that we don't know and we don't see, and we all speculate on who they are. And I'm sure that that's making decisions for people at that level of government.
Yeah.
But I still have some confidence in the smaller governments and in the people getting through to the knuckleheads up there.
Of course, Hilawe commented in the super chat. He says, "Parliamentary democracies make for swift changes and more laws." Well, there's still too many laws in this, I guess, in the system. But yeah, I mean, it was just like a couple months ago. I went and testified at the New Hampshire State House about some bill that was trying to ban CBDCs, but the writing of it would probably ban all crypto. And good thing that it didn't end up going through. And then I remember another bill dropped that was talking about legalizing, like doing a legal framework for DAOs. And like, I know the guy on the committee who does that, and I read this thing, and it was quite thorough about like what to do in like a hard fork situation, and all the token holders, this and that. And I'm just reading through this thing, knowing the average age of the New Hampshire legislature is like 75 years old, and I'm just like, yeah, I was just waiting, looking at my phone, and then it rings, and he's like, "Hey, can you help explain the DAO to a bunch of boomers?" I'm like, I was waiting for that. And so I made a little presentation with little doodles and stuff and sent it into the committee so they could get it. I don't know where the bill ended up there, but yeah, it's kind of as you mentioned, the access is much better at the state level, and it just, the ability for people to kind of get something going is a lot more at the macro level, like the federal level in the U.S. In the U.S.'s case. It seems to be a lot more, you have to have strong winds of change moving in one direction. And there's some, I guess, there isn't really that much of a crypto lobby to speak of. Like, it's still a very small and niche kind of community. And, you know, a lot of them are very self-interested, very just like, I'm going to trade. Oh, if it leaves the U.S., I'm going to go VPN and Binance somewhere else kind of thing. But the industry, I should say, you know, the investment in states and capital in specific jurisdictions and stuff, that is an important lobby, where now you have people that say, well, I don't care necessarily about crypto, but all these companies that bring in a ton of money are all currently funding our local economy. And if they leave, they leave. And so now it's just like, you want to run on a pro crypto thing, even if your constituents don't care about crypto, because they just do care about the money coming into the state.
Yeah, and to that end, I think that even the platform of not necessarily being pro crypto, but being pro listening to crypto people would probably be a good start even. That if someone ran on that platform, like, yeah, I'll listen to the experts on this. And right now, that doesn't even seem to be in their vocabulary. So
Yeah, of course.
I know the people who are having this fight, they're having a real tough time with it. And I'd love to help, but I don't really like talking to cops. So I'll leave it up to the pros.
Yeah, I mean, tell me about it. Well, let's touch on this better story here. Sports Illustrated launches Polygon-based NFT ticketing platform. Sports Illustrated's new service called Box Office will allow event organizers to issue commemorative non-fungible token tickets, including pre-attendance and post-event audience perks. And so this kind of, I've seen a million things like this, right? There was, I believe, the last Super Bowl. I don't know if it was the last one, but they issued NFT versions of all the tickets on ETH. And Polygon seems to be ETH now. Like, look at me, I'm the ETH now, because you can't use ETH, like $15, $20 transact. It's still more expensive than Bitcoin even right now. So, yeah, it's pretty insane. So, but the point being about like NFT use cases and stuff, it seems like the mainstream adoption of crypto, and of course, mass adoption is, you know, is whatever. But like these technologies sort of like working their way into the real world, as it were, seems to be just continuing on. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the NFT ticket kind of thing.
I absolutely do. I think tickets are, to me, the first logical use of an NFT, and I think on the sense of authentication, like encryption, cryptography is really good at authentication. Besides secrets, it can also do that. And so I think like it's cool that this is actually being used places. I've heard of concert tickets and nerd conference tickets and things like that using NFT type stuff. I think that's excellent. What it comes with in the way that it's being used by things like the Super Bowl and I think like Top Deck or one of the trading cards was doing this, like the actual collector aspect of the NFT. When I was young, I used to have a binder of all of my concert tickets that I ever went to and sports tickets that I ever went to and all of that. And I think like this is kind of the next level, next generation version of that. So you have your wallet, you have your crypto wallet on your phone, and you can pull it out and show people, oh, look at all of these cool things that I did. Or you can do it for yourself and get the nostalgia out of it years later. This is something our generation can probably only connect to, these sort of old scrapbooks that we used to have. But I totally see people doing this on their phone, and POAPs are another version of that. These proof of attendance tokens, whatever they are. So I think it's really cool. I think it's excellent for security. I think that it's cool for the ticket selling company. It's cool for the consumer, and it's also cool on the collection and experimentation side.
Yeah, it is kind of funny how like the use case for the NFT thing, I kind of struggle. Like we all talk about like peer-to-peer electronic cash, right? That's the big thing that crypto was always supposed to do. But unfortunately, or fortunately, or whatever, Ali, because it just is, it seems like other things have sort of taken over. Like the casino is like Sergey Kotliar of Bitrefill, which is probably the single most adoption of for real use as money focused company in the entire crypto space. I mean, up there, maybe, you know, some might argue BitPay might be more or something like that, but it's he just said like the killer app is the shitcoin casino, like it, and as kind of like just like a realization of like where we're at right now. Like crypto really allows people to speculate on tokens very easily, and NFTs are part of that, but also just the collectible, the digital collectible thing is really important, because a lot of times people, and this is something it took me a while to figure out, because I'm not big into collectibles, but I'm not super big into collectibles, and like I collect stuff that has value, I guess, over time, that like is personal value to me or something. But there's a lot of people who love to collect things. Like, oh, I got this trading card series, I got this and that, and there's just so much physical expenditure of like physical resources in those kinds of things. You got to manufacture stuff, you got to ship them, you got to do all this kind of stuff. and then a rat eats into your Beanie Baby, and you're like screwed. It just there's a lot of that stuff, and so but people don't care that there's a physical little thing that's soft. They just the collectible, and so the value, the physical element. So hold on a second. This is one of my old collectibles. They don't make these anymore, as far as I know, but it's a Doge pillow. It's
Amazing.
much wow.
It's beautiful.
Yes, and so I have used it as a pillow before, but mostly it's decorative. But the point of something like that is the 90% of the value of that can be captured by an NFT. 10% of it is like the fuzzy stuff. 10% of it is like, and 10% is 90% of the costs at least, is that. And so NFTs made this like collectible token thing, the ability to tokenize and immortalize a thing, super efficient and durable. And yeah, with NFT trophy cases where you don't have to like take people into your bedroom to be like, look at all my action figures. It's just like, it's in your wallet. Now, one thing that I would love to see at some point is, I guess you can already kind of do this with stuff like Railgun, but is like zero knowledge proof NFTs, which is kind of pulling opposite directions because NFTs are there to be displayed, and CK Snarks or whatever are good at hiding things, but there is like it's like a selective reveal type of a mechanism, right?
And it's really the amazing thing about this idea of the of zero knowledge is that like zero knowledge proofs prove that you have something without showing someone that you have it. So you can get the joy of the collection, of the individualism, the uniqueness of the stuff you're collecting. And if someone wants to see it, you can give them a viewing key. You can sell them a viewing key. The way that the NFTs, the way I understand how NFTs work, where you're actually the protocol itself, where you're just linking to some URL somewhere where there may or may not be a picture. This is the real non-ideal side of that sort of exchange. But in the sense of NFT tickets, if you did that with zero knowledge proofs, then you would be able to keep your ticket collection private unless you wanted someone to show it. So you wouldn't have a public ledger showing everyone where you've been, and which is nice for some people. It's considered some metadata leakage for some people. So it depends on what the NFTs are. You could use it to protect your art collection. You can also use it to protect your activities. Yeah.
At some point I was thinking like, oh, that's probably good for someone, like an application for something like Zcash. However, there's already NFTs on stuff like Polygon, for example. And by running them through, obviously Polygon's not the ideal L2 because, centralization issues and stuff. And ideally there is no L2, right? But then you can't, Ethereum sucks. So I think that we're in a larva, we're at a larva stage for NFTs for sure, because the platforms that work for them are, I can't see Polygon being what everyone uses in the future, in the more distant future, because the benefits of, I guess, decentralization, censorship resistance, and all that stuff are not really there as much. But so you can use the Railgun contract on Polygon and just have all your, as I tweeted out before about no one needs, if you use Railgun, no one needs to know that you bought that Trump NFT, because it just all goes into the, into the shielded pool, and then there you go. It's like, and if you want to selectively reveal it, for example, you say Trump only lets you into his super secret events, and you're just like, guess what? I'm going to sign it with my Railway wallet. Zoop. There you go. It froze up a little bit there, but yeah, it's just a temporary Wi-Fi glitch. But one thing that I think is kind of funny is just how many people, just how much volume went through the Trump NFT collection, like how quickly. And clearly, who knows if it was just a few people that just ended up making this, popular, or if it really became kind of more. I think it was a whole lot of speculation of just like, dude, we're never going to have another Trump NFT collection, although he did kind of reboot the whole thing. But definitely, the privacy angle really impacts the whole thing when you start thinking about, first of all, do people know what memberships you're part of? Like, you bought this, you must be a this political leaning or whatever like that. But on the other hand, it could also be a thing of like value. So actually, let me turn this thing off real quick. Anyway, yeah, I got mirrored there for a second. Ryan got kicked off because of, I guess, connectivity issues, but I'm just going to finish that thought. So at some point when people have very valuable things in their NFT collections, they're going to really want privacy and as far as what they own. It's not just a thing of like exposure, like, oh, what do we actually have in here? Like, it just, the value, and then it's like, oh, that person would be a valuable person to compromise. So yeah, that's kind of the little NFT rant thing. We should probably just wrap this up at this point. I was going to, well, actually, I'll do the presentation thing, and he'll get to see it later. But so for people, hit this one first. For people on the show, speaking of NFTs, anyone who's on the show can, I give away a special commemorative NFT that actually lets you into my Discord, so you could leave stuff in the super chat like Hilawe was doing earlier. But you can also, by the way, buy ones like this that have this logo I'm showing right there. And then you get in and I'll do all those specials. So that's the proof of stake version. But the proof of work is the one you have to be on the show. And it's my little way of saying thank you. I'm going to give Ryan one of these once I can get him to get a Polygon address. And I'll send one of these over to him as a nice little thank you for being on the show. So anyway, that was a good time. Thanks everyone for being on. This was, or for watching, I should say. Thanks to Ryan for being on. This is a fun time. Next week, next Friday, I can't remember who the rundown guest is, but next Friday is the next episode of the Zcash podcast. I'm doing it a week early for travel reasons, and the one and only Zuko Wilcox is going to be on. Everyone loves that guy, right? All right. Good chatting with you guys. See you guys around.